In this tutorial I'm going to be talking about lighting. With 3-point lighting there are 3 main lights that are most commonly used in this setup. The first is the key light, which is the most powerful of the 3 lights and is often used to light up the majority of the subject's face. The second most powerful light in this setup is known as the fill light. The fill light is most commonly used to light up the remainder of the subject's face on the opposite side to the key light. And then the last and least powerful light in this setup is known as a backlight. It's commonly used to separate a subject from the background as it adds a slight halo to whatever it's lighting up. This is an example of 3-point lighting when all 3 lights are used together. This is also an example of high key lighting, meaning there are lots of lights in the scene and they're very soft. High key lighting tends to be used for more comedic purposes as the light tends to be very warm and natural. These 3 clips are examples of low key lighting, in which there are only 1 or 2 lights used and they create very harsh shadows. Low key lighting is often used in horrors or thrillers too, as it creates an intense image as there is a lot of contrast between the highlights and the shadows. Lights can also be used from different angles to give a very different feel to the image produced by the camera. What you see here is an example of low angle lighting. This is often used in horrors or thrillers as it adds a very unnatural shadow to the subject's face. This often comes across as very sinister, which is why it fits the genre perfectly. And then this is an example of high angle lighting. This is considered to be a much more natural look as it's similar to standing outside under the sun. This is an example of lighting through blinds. It creates long shadows that pass right through the scene, which creates a feeling of intensity. It also creates a lot of contrast in the scene as it's about 50% shadows and 50% highlights. This is an example of film noir lighting. It's famously used in thrillers as it creates a sense of mystery. Here you can see the application for gels. Gels can often be used to change the colour temperature of a light. There are 2 different colour temperatures, cool and warm. And then you can use a combination of gels to change the light anywhere between the 2. Here we've rotated the light around the subject's head to show what the shadows do when you change the angle of the lighting. I'm going to talk for a second about the different kind of lights. Natural light just comes from the sun and it's a very good light source. The only problem with natural light is you have no physical control over it as the sun moves at different times of the day, and it can also depend on the weather how much light you actually get out of the sun. On a clear day the light from the sun will be quite warm and harsh as it doesn't have to pass through the clouds. Whereas on a day like this where it's overcast the light will be much cooler in terms of colour temperature, and it will also be a lot softer as it has to pass through the clouds to hit whatever it's lighting up. Next there are LED panels which are really useful because they can actually run on batteries. The one I'm using as a backlight over there is a very small one, but you can also get much bigger ones that light up a much larger area, and they're also more powerful. The higher end LED panels allow you to change the colour temperature of the light from blue to orange as well, so they're very useful. One of the benefits of these is that they don't get warm as well, so you can leave them on for a long time and they won't heat up and burn you if you touch them. Next there are lights that use fluorescent bulbs. Fluorescent bulbs are daylight balanced and they're often used in conjunction with a diffusion panel so that you can get a very soft light out of them and a very cool light. They're very useful because at their daylight balance you can use them in conjunction with gels in order to change the colour temperature. Whereas with a light that has a tungsten bulb in it, it's very difficult to change the colour temperature because tungsten bulbs already produce a very orange colour. And then there's more powerful lights such as redheads that use tungsten bulbs. These lights are much more powerful and they produce a lot more light, but they're also very orange and warm, and the bulbs get very hot. You can get different sizes of these lights, and the biggest ones can even be used to simulate the sun if you're on an inside film set. Which light you choose to use depends on what effect you want to get out of it, and they can all produce a very different look. It all just depends on the style you're going for. This is another example of 3-point lighting, except in this setup I only have 1 light. In this case I have a window on my left which I'm using the light from the sun. So this is creating soft light as it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and it's really overcast outside, so the light's very soft because the sun's going through the clouds, which is creating a very soft light on this side of my face. And then on this side I have a white bed sheet which is reflecting the light from the sun back onto this side of my face. This is known as a bounce or a reflector. And then on this side here I have a small 160 LED panel that I'm using as a backlight to give this kind of halo effect, as I said earlier, on the side of my face and like the back of my shoulders. The key thing in this setup is the use of the sheet. If I take this down now, you'll be able to see a huge difference in the side of my face because there's no light being reflected back on from the sun. So I've simply got the backlight and then the key light here. And now the sheet's back up and reflecting light back onto the side of my face. You can see the difference. I'll show a picture of a reflector now so that you guys can see what it looks like. But I don't actually own one, although I've seen enough videos to know that you can make a reflector out of pretty much anything that has a shiny or white surface. In this case I'm using a bed sheet, but you can also use things like tin foil or just a large piece of paper. The key purpose of this is that a light surface is able to reflect sunlight back onto this side. And as you can see it's not as bright as the sun, which means that this is kind of acting as the fill light. I've got the key light here, which is the sun, and then the backlight, which is the LED panel over there to my right. And this is an example of how using reflectors in the sun can actually allow you to make a 3-point lighting setup with only having 1 light in the setup at all. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial on the basics of lighting.